Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the April edition of the Structural Development Macroeconomics Research Group seminar series. Today I'm very happy to have with us to introduce Professor Paulo Medeiros. Professor Paulo Medeiros got his PhD from the University of Siena and has recently joined the Department of Economics at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte. After a passage at the University of Milano Bicocca. And he will be talking a little bit about informality of financial markets and macroeconomic instability. So Minsk as an important piece of his talk today. And this paper has been recently accepted for publication in the Journal of Evolutionary Economics. Today we also have Juárez from UNAM, from Mexico, joining us from Mexico, and of course our dear friend Moura from the University of Brasilia. So thank you again, Paulo, for accepting the invitation. It's amazing to have you with us. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here presenting that paper. As you said, it will be out soon by the Journal of Evolutionary Economics. So let me put the presentation mode here. I do that or you do that? I don't know. Yes, perfect. So as you said, I'd like to talk a bit about informality, financial markets, and macroeconomic instability. The idea here is to try to think a bit about, okay, we have a lot of people talking about macroeconomic instability and financial markets, especially after the 2008 crisis. But I was missing a bit about, okay, what's the role of informality on that story? So this is exactly the idea of that paper, okay? I'm thinking here about, okay, how does informality reshape the feedback between beliefs, funding conditions, and real activity when the economy can generate endogenous instability? Here I'm trying to think about the idea of, look, we have a lot of different papers thinking about the role of beliefs, right? We have the strong literature talking about heterogeneous agent models with heterogeneous beliefs and how that kind of dynamic can generate instability. So my idea here is, look, if you look to develop the economy baseline, you have the formal financial system transmitting expectation into funding conditions. We already know that. And we also know that macro-financial instability is often studied through formal credit channels. But at the same time, we know that the developing economies usually faces some frictions. For example, the informality segment usually has no access or really small access to the financial markets. At the same time, they are like cash flow based in the sense that, look, I can't get some money, some loan. I can't bring my expected future liquidity into the present. So usually I only rely on it on my own pocket to fulfill my financial obligations, right? So what I would like to bring here is the idea that, look, informality is not only a level edge. It can be a propagation mechanism itself, right? So basically, I'm choosing to make a contribution, first making some bridge in the literature, right? We have, as I said before, that heterogeneous expectation and adaptive selection from some models, especially some models from the 90s, like Chiarella, Broken Homens, etc. You have the idea of Minskian and liquidity solvents feedback as a traditional Minskian approach from the 80s. You'll see also different papers exploring that in the future. And also the idea of dual economies, right? It means that we have economies with formal and informal margins for different firms operating in the same system. And my contribution here is like, okay, I'd like to build a Ham-style real financial feedback model. What it means, I'd like to connect the heterogeneous expectation block, the real financial interaction with that idea of informality, right? So I will have heterogeneity in the financial access. The capacity gap is also different between the sector. And in extension, I will explore the endogenous effective formal participation, okay? So the first big takeaway, I'm sorry, I'm not really okay now, my throat, but the big takeaway for this first part is the idea that, look, greater formality can raise average activity, but it can also strengthen belief sensitivity, underwriting, and move the economy closer to instability. So what I'm saying here, that if you increase the average, let's focus on this word, average. If I'm increasing the average formality, I'm increasing the average output, but at the same time, I'm increasing the chance of the economy entering a zone of instability. This looks a bit strange when you think, okay, but we use it to see that usually usually countries with higher level of informality usually face problem with instability. This is a bit strange. Yes, but this paper will explain exactly why we see that kind of phenomena and why people usually commit some mistakes, or that sometimes they kind of mix both things. Like, for example, the average level of informality with the way informality changes along the business cycles, okay? So in that first part, we have to construct the model. So basically, I'm doing here a formal model, a theoretical model. We have some kind of exercise, empirical, not empirical, but statistical exercise in the end. But the construction of this model is based on the empirical papers. So basically, we have at one side financial asymmetry. It's the idea that, look, the formal activity, the formal side of the economy, can borrow against expected future liquidity. At the same time, the informal activity is tied more closely to contemporaneous cash flow. The idea I said before about, okay, I should rely on the money I have on my pocket to pay my debts. And of course, expectations to solvents kind of feedback, it's composition dependent, and we see that in details. At the same time, on the real side, we know that the formal production has higher short-run adjustment capacity. What I'm saying by that? Look, if the economy is growing more, usually the formal sector starts to hire more people. It means what? You're taking people from the informal sector to the real sector. At the same time, if I need some new technique, I need some machine, etc., I have credit to do it, okay? So usually the capacity of the formal sector to increase production, it's also different, okay? On the other hand, the informal production is constrained by scale, technology, the quality of inputs. And the composition will affect the excess demand and the output adjustment, okay? So the model separates average informality from cyclical relocation informality. This is the first clue we have here to start understanding the point people usually make some mess, okay? Here we have, in this figure, the model architecture. We have that kind of cycle. On the right, you see output, liquidity, solvency. Here, we have the three main variables we will explore here, right? This is the vector of the model, as you can see. So what's the connection here? You see that given an output, this is what it becomes. It becomes liquidity because you have cash flow flux here. So if you're having more cash flow, your liquidity will change. At the same time, if your liquidity changes, you can become more solvent. You can pay your obligation at the same way. At the same time, you can become less solvent and affect your liquidity given your business plan, right? If you want to take more loan, it will affect also your liquidity. And given the expenditure, you have the aggregate demand, as we already know, the basic Keynesian mechanism, and it will give us the excess demand, okay? If the excess demand is positive, firms will increase production and vice versa, okay? And of course, the expenditure on the production will be made by the formal and informal sector, and given the production, I'll back to the output and the liquidity and so on. So this is the mechanism I'm kind of interested here, okay? First, we have that financial block. Our financial block, it's talking about the segmented underwriting. It's the idea that, look, in the formal segment, agents can discount expected liquidity flow, right? This is a different, it's a different way of to talk about acquire loan here. So basically, it depends on the discounted expected liquidity and the beliefs through the underwriting conditions. We understand a bit more on the next slide. And the informal segment, basically, they are, as I said before, they relies on the effective liquidity today. Okay, if you check the difference on both, you can see, look, one guy can rely on the liquidity today, but also he has the option of bring the future liquidity to present. And the informal segment, they can do that. Okay, and for the rest of the model, we can see that we use the parameter lambda to determine the share of the formal sector in the liquidity. As you can see there, we have lambda LT, and of course, 1 minus lambda LT for the share of the informal sector. When we think about the formal firms, we have this equation here. I'll try to reduce here the idea. Of course, it's more complete in the paper, but basically it's the idea that, look, agents work with two different expectations regarding future liquidity. They can be extrapolators. It's the idea that the future liquidity will run away from a given tranquility level. Here, I'm just a clarification, it's not equilibrium, that L bar is not an equilibrium, it's a notion of stable liquidity in tranquility times, okay? Basically, the extrapolators think always that the liquidity will escape from that level. At the same time, we have mean reverters that expect the liquidity back to that level. If we think about the finance literature, we see something similar regarding prices with extrapolators and fundamentalists, for example. So basically that parameter omega will give the share of extrapolators and mean reverters in the economy. And okay, what's the point of that? This will affect the parameter beta. On the parameter beta, we'll connect the sensitivity of creditworthiness to liquidity, and basically it will make the glue between our solvency block and our liquidity block, okay? The liquidity dynamics here basically follows the idea that, look, the agents can choose a safety margin to operate. Okay, for example, the exogenous think that, okay, maybe I need to finish the period with X of money to be secured against any shock, for example. They can decide a safety margin for that. And usually, if the solvency is lower than that level, firms rebuild liquidity and vice versa. This will be interesting because, as you remember, I said that solvency and liquidity are connected, and this is an important part, okay? We have the aggregated closure here that will connect also with the real part, but we can explore more in the next slide. It will be more clear, okay? But basically, liquidity is the balance sheet adjustment margin that links the financial slack to reactivity. We have to always think about that and to be clear, okay? Sorry. When we think about the real block, we can think about that bounded output adjustment. For economists, sometimes this graphic here can be a bit strange. But here, what I'm saying is like, look, remember I said we have excess demand, and given the excess demand, firms will decide if they produce more or less, okay? So the excess demand, AT will be the difference between the demand Z and the production T. So the production T plus 1 will be just the production for the past period plus a function of this excess demand. And that function here, I decided to use the hyperbolic tangent. Why? The hyperbolic tangent is an interesting function because it can give us, in a reduced form, idea to combine how demand becomes production, okay? If you see, can check with some attention here, we'll see that, look, the orange line, it's a hyperbolic tangent function, also the blue one, but one is different from another. If we look at the right side, you see that the orange one has a bigger productive capacity. What it means, as I said before, we're thinking about a sector that can produce more than the other sector. So that's why the orange one represents the formal sector. If we look at the left side, we see that the orange line is lower than the blue one. Why? Because here we're saying that, look, during periods of downturns, usually the informal sector capture part of the labor force in the production from the formal side. Why? Imagine, for example, on a country with a high level of informality, what happens? In a difficulty situation, when the economy goes down, usually people who lost the job in the formal sector start, for example, to sell chocolates in the streets, right? This means that, look, that guy was contributing to the formal sector, and now he's contributing to the informal sector. It means that in that kind of economy, the informal sector usually absorb part of that loss of production, right? Basically, people also can ask, and the editor asked me the same, okay, why you decided to use that kind of hyperbolic tangent function? It's not so common to economists, right? Usually when we talk about production, we have a $2 or something like that. But for this specific thing we're doing here, it's really important. Why? Because first, it's a linearly local function. So here, if we have accelerator mechanism, for example, we have a clear interpretation of the phenomena because it's locally linear. At the same time, it's globally bounded, right? For example, as you see, it's a bounded function, and it's useful because you can think, for example, in the upper part about decreasing returns, for example. At some point, given your capital stock, you can't increase production. At the same time, on the negative part, you can say, look, it's the case that firms have also contracts from the past or some exogenous reasons to keep producing. So that's why we work here with a ceiling and floor, okay? And given the fact it's globally bounded and we can justify economically, we can prevent mechanically explosive output adjustments. So it gives that kind of stability that it's interesting for us here, okay? The excess demand basically is the combination of three different things. You have the Z0. Basically, the Z0 gives us the autonomous part of the demand. We have the consumption component, usually associated with multiplier accelerator effect that usually you can see in Keynesian models, and that negative part with that CC associated with the fact that if I would like to increase my solvency, it means I will have to reduce my demand, okay? On the right side, we have the same, but for the investment. Here, we're saying that only the formal sector invest. So that's why I call that the formal investment component. When we reorganize that, we have that excess demand function organized. And now, once again, we have the lambda for financial formality and theta for real side formality. It's just the share of formality in each sector. So it can give us the excess demand, okay? If we combine everything, we'll have this step by step in the paper. We have this baseline nonlinear map M1. This map is given to us how the liquidity, the solvency, and the output of the economy moves, okay? So we have that state vector that summarizes the liquidity, the solvency, that means the creditworthiness conditions, and the aggregate output. Of course, as you can see, the excess demand enters in the production and also in the liquidity. As I said before, the production is connected with the liquidity. Why? Because you have cash flows, right? So check that you can see that almost the same equation of output is inside the liquidity equation. Basically, the delta Y is inside the liquidity equation, saying that, look, if I'm changing the liquidity, given my parameter mi bar, I will increase my cash flow. I have also, as I said before, that safety margin for both sectors and my solvency. And the way that all that things affect the liquidity is also filtered by our parameter alpha. It will be important next. We have also our solvency for both sectors and also our production. Remember that eta F and eta I are the ceilings and floor for the hyperbolic tangent function, as we saw before, okay? Here we don't have to spend a lot of time, but if you have the step-by-step in the proposition and proof in the paper, of course, here we can find that in the equilibrium, the solvency of the economy is determined by that safety margins that firms determine exogenously. So if the firms say that, okay, we would like to act with that safety margins, it will be the solvency in equilibrium, okay? So given the decision of being more or less safe, the economy will be more or less solvent in the long run. The liquidity also use the same concept, but it's filtered by the financial expectations variables and also the share of the formal sector and also the output. Something interesting we can see here, if you take the first derivative, something simple, you see that, look, if we increase the share of the formal sector, the lambda, will be increasing, will be decreasing the equilibrium liquidity, right? At the same time, if we do the same with the output, we'll be increasing the output in equilibrium. It's lower than zero, but you can see we have the negative sign on the left side also, so you know that it's positive, right? So what's even more important to us here, it's local stability, right? If we check that system is compatible with two different bifurcations. It's compatible with a flip bifurcation and a Neymark-Sacker bifurcation. The flip bifurcation usually is connected with the real financial accelerator with a pure Dublin root, right? It usually appears when you have an extremely low level of informality. For example, when you don't have conditions to self-finance your production. For example, you're making a round of production, then given your excess demand, you don't have enough cash flow to fulfill your obligation, so you start to have that kind of instability. On the other hand, when you think about Neymark-Sacker bifurcation, we're talking about complex eigenvalues crossing the unit circle, and we'll have an invariant closed curve and endogenous cycle. In that situation, here is more closer to the financial dynamics between solvency and liquidity, as you can see soon. Here, making some numerical exercise with the variable alpha. I said before, remember, it's the variable that connect the liquidity changes given the solvency and the output, that says the cash flow, with the future liquidity. And at the same time, the share of informal sector, lambda for the financial side and theta for the real side. So if I increase the share of the formal sector, what I'm saying here, I'm increasing my chance of enter in a zone of instability, okay? At the same time, if I reduce my alpha, I also do the same. For the real side, if I increase the share of the formal sector, I only reduce the chance of instability. Why? Because the instability associated with the Neymark-Sacker is more connected to the financial conditions. As you can see, it basically don't change the red line, but the condition connected to the flip bifurcation becomes more difficult, okay? Here I did a kind of small robustness test, the quantity of extrapolators regarding the expectations, as I said before, basically will not change the dynamic here. It will become more important in the second part, okay? This graph here is really interesting. Basically, what I'm saying here, look, let's consider that theta and also lambda are moving in the same way. So I'm treating both as equal. So here, lambda means the total share of the formal sector in the real and the financial sides. And here in the left graph, we have solvency and liquidity. What's happening? To be clear, let's look to the right one. We have the same thing, but regarding output. If I increase the share, I'm increasing the average output, okay? But at a given point, it will start to become unstable. Why? Because I enter in a zone of Neymark-Sacker fluctuation. And why this kind of thing happens, we need the left graph to understand. In the moment I start increasing the share, you can see that, for example, before the bifurcation point, you can see that strange spheres, okay? On the left side, you see that liquidity and solvents are stable and the same. And after the point of the bifurcation, we'll have that Neymark-Sacker bifurcation. You see that external parts that form that globe, you can think as the limit where that fluctuation will kick in, okay? So you see also that liquidity, the blue one, is fluctuating in a smaller zone. And what I'm saying here, the fluctuation between liquidity and solvency is creating liquidity mismatch. And this is the reason why the Neymark-Sacker bifurcation is more closer to liquidity mismatch and that failure in the financial sector, okay? Just a second. So if you're back here, what I'm saying, again, is that first result, right? If I'm increasing the share of formality, I'm having a higher average output, but I'm paying that with a bigger chance of instability. And higher the share of the formal sector, higher will be the liquidity mismatch I have here, okay? So on the other side, now we can consider an extension with endogenous heterogeneity. What are we doing here? The beliefs composition will become endogenous, the financial formality and the real formality. So I'm saying now that, look, before the expectation was fixed. Now given the situation of the economy, the agents will choose to change between extrapolators or mean reverters endogenously, okay? And the same for the formality. We can interpret this here, but think like, look, we're talking about effective participation intensity and not instantaneous legal reclassification. This is important because one of reviewers asked me, okay, you're saying that you're changing the share of informality in the short run. This makes no sense. When we talk about informality, we're talking about something that takes a lot of time to change. But here we're talking about margin change, all right? You have that some people can change to the sector, but some companies, for example, can have part of his production going for the formal sector. For example, it's really normal. Companies during the period keep part of the workers hired formally and part doing indirectly with informal adjustments. So this is a kind of margin adjustment that happens in economies. We don't have to wait for a legal reclassification to study that kind of change, okay? This is important to clarify. So here I'm following the tradition of broken homes, and I decided to use a logit updating rule. It's basically the idea that, look, if a variable it's inside 1 and 0, I can use that logit form to determine how that thing will change between 0 and 1. So I'm saying that given a specific input function, I will decide if the share of something will increase or decrease. For the case of the expectations, I'm using the idea of the situation of the economy, okay? If variations in the output will induce people to become more extrapolator. This is interesting because you have some kind of support for that idea. At the same time, for the financial share, you have that change in the liquidity will make the economy be more prone to put credit in the hand of the financials of the informal sector in some way. At the same time, the real share will change also given change in the production based on that mechanism I explained before. Remember, I said that when the economy goes up, usually part of the informal sector goes to the formal sector and vice versa. Okay. So basically, after all the adjustment, we put the new variables inside of the map, and we have the endogenous heterogeneous map M2. Here, the interesting result here that you guys will be able to understand better why it's interesting. It's because we have the same fixed point and we have the same stability conditions as before. And this is really interesting because now we're not interested in studying the fixed point only. The global dynamics here becomes more important to us, okay? That's the why this result will not making the past map like not useful at all. It's still useful. But the past map was more interesting on average. Here we're interested in global dynamics. What's happened is that all that my variables now that change the compositions become state dependent. And this is something really interesting to understand. If you redo that bifurcation diagrams again, now we're talking about A only, okay? If I increase A, I increase the possibility of instability. If you check on the left side, that parameters gamma are capturing the intensity of choice. Now, if you remember from that kind of model, the intensity of choice mediates how much that input, I said before, will create change in the variable. Let me back here. See here, for example, the generic adaptive share here, the first one, you have the input XTA, and you have that variable on the side. This is the intensity of choice. If I increase that variable, the speed in which the share will change will increase also, okay? So here I plotted like the intensity of choice 0. So if I choose to put 0, it means I back to that condition as the first map. I have no movement at all. And also 1. What's happening here? If I have the same equilibrium point, and I have the same bifurcation point. So the model will bifurcate in the same values. But here we have something interesting, because if you check the right graph, the dynamics we create are different, right? For the ones who knows a bit about bifurcation, you can see that in the left side we have something that's more organized. Looks like more a classic Neymark-Sacker bifurcation. On the right side, we have something blur, more complicated to understand. Okay. Here I have the phase diagrams here, and I plotted the phase space, and I check the expectations working in a separate way. If I turn on only the endogenous expectation and keep the informality part as before, the map starts to become a bit strange, right? You see that you have that circle, we have cycles here, but that cycles are more irregular. If you check only with endogenous informality, the effect is not so big, right? I mean, if you check here, you see that we have cycles, but we had cycles before, right? We changed a bit. But if you compare the both maps, you see that the map M1 with, like as before, with 0 movement, generate kind of cycle. But if I turn on the both endogenous mechanism, we have the possibility of chaotic dynamics. So what I'm saying here is not only the fact that I have endogenous expectations and informality, okay? It's the combination of that both things. It will create that kind of complex dynamics. By the way, if you check the map M1 here and the endogenous informality, you see that you don't have a lot of difference, right? We changed the geometry of the phase space a bit, but it's not so different. But the difference between endogenous expectations and the map M2 say to us that, look, that kind of change can become really effective when you check the full dynamics of the model, right? This is interesting. Why? Because imagine that if we have an extrapolators going up, what it means. The guys are more expecting more liquidity to the future. The guys become more optimistic in a given way, okay? But at the same time, if I'm increasing the share of people going to the formal sector, that guys will also become more kind of extrapolative, and they will also increase the number of guys taking credit. But at the same time, when the economy back to a bad situation, some guys are kicked out from the formal sector. And what it means, they start to find some difficulty to fulfill the debt obligation because they can't get liquidity anymore. They should rely with the liquidity from the period T. They can't bring future flux, and it also affects the solvency. So what I'm saying here is basically that dynamic here on the left side becomes even more complicated now because of the endogenous shares combined. Okay, that's the why I have that kind of chaotic dynamics, or at least something more complicated. Okay, we have here we can see that it looks like a chaotic dynamic. Of course, I can't say like for sure it's a chaotic dynamic, but we have a good evidence on that direction. Okay. So to make it even more clear, I did some volatility exercise here. Look, I decided to check 3 scenarios: a scenario of low informality, high informality and high informality with endogenous shares, okay? And I added a stochastic shock to liquidity and demand to check what happens. For the liquidity shock, okay? Look at that standard deviation in here, right? It's 1.023 for low informality and 0.8 for high informality, right? What I'm saying here, I'm saying that, look, as in the first scenario, if I'm increasing the share of formal firms, I'm increasing volatility, I'm increasing instability in general, right? Here I'm using volatility and instability more or less closer. But if I keep the high informality and I put the endogenous shares changing, I have even more volatility than in the case with low informality and with high informality. So it's a bit strange, right? If the level of formality increases, I have more instability. But if I have lower informality with endogenous shares, I have even more. So I'm saying here is that, look, the endogenous relocation raises volatility more than the average informality alone. I have both effects working at the same time. But the difference here is like I have to check how the share of the informal sector changes in that economies to really see why the countries with high informality usually delivers more volatility. If you think about a country with low informality, usually that country doesn't even have that informal sector to get the guys from the formal sector in a big period and vice versa. So what happens in that country? Usually in a bad situation, the guy just are not working and they get like a generous social security, for example, or at the same time you have some kind of ways to recapitalize your company, because usually developed country you have more access to credit and cost less. So you have a lot of different mechanisms to think about that in countries with high formality. So that's the why usually that kind of that the effect of go in, go out usually appear in countries with high formality, because that structure is already there in that kind of country, okay? And something interesting, people who work with that kind of model usually heard at least one time, look, that kind of model works really well because you can adjust the parameter of intensity of choice, so your model works because of that. So I heard that in a conference at the time, so I decided to do, look, let's do a kind of robustness. I keep increasing my intensity of change parameter and see what happens, okay? And what I did here, I start to increase in the parameter, and look, even with a small adjustment, especially like in the zones like you don't need like a super fast change. If I have a small change between real and formal and informal sector, I'm starting to see that the volatility increases a lot, right? So of course, if you go into more and more, the dispersion will increase, but you see that the volatility will increase even for small levels. You can see for both graphs. By the way, the second graph here, I'm checking the volatility for the expectations, right? There's a typo here. It's expectation on the left, and on the right is the total share of formality. But in both cases, you see that even a small increase will create a big increase on the volatility. So as we say here, in the instability, okay? I made also a Monte Carlo sensitivity test to also find another robustness to that idea that the shares matters more than the average, and I found something interesting. The parameter there for the both sectors, as you can see, the last one, the gamma for both sectors, when I increase the share of the speed of adjustment between both sectors, I have a bigger correlation with increasing the volatility, Okay, of course, you have other interesting things here, like the accelerator parameter. Of course, this is clear. If you increase the accelerator parameter, you have more volatility. But even like that parameter for the share of the real, that share of the formal and informal sector really determines the volatility in that situation. Okay, so the main takeaways here is like the formality changed the real financial feedback loop through segmented financial access and lower informal adjustment capacity. This agrees with the first thing I said in the beginning. Look, informality here is not just a wedge. Informality here really affects how the economy is operating. Two, the fixed composition delivers a formality trade-off. So I'm here yet? What happened? Yes, it was a strange thing in my computer. So you have that formality, that trade-off, as we saw before in the first part, higher average activity and stronger exposure to belief sensitivity, given an increase in the formal sector. Okay, we saw also that fixed point and the stability structure is the same for both models, but when we start to think about the endogenous effect, we see that the volatility is driven mainly by the intensity of cyclical relocations and not only by the average level of informality, okay? So for some policy implication here is the fact that, look, formalization can raise capacity and average activity, but stabilization requires mechanisms that dampen the procyclicality of funding conditions and effective composition. What I'm saying here is basically, look, especially if you have if you're in a country with a higher level of informality, you have to check that, look, given the capacity of informal firms take credit and start to become like a formal firm and then back to the situation and lose the capacity to fulfill the obligations, maybe we'll have to design something to prevent that kind of mechanism. And some empirical implications we show with the red set form test that we can distinguish cyclical allocation informality with the average. And for the next step, maybe it's the case of using microevidence on credit, invoicing, and employment transition to discipline that switching parameters. So we'll start to understand a bit more that impact. And maybe in the next model, we have to work a bit with policy rules that affect the way the formal and informal sectors participate in the economy and also affects the dynamic, okay? That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulo. And I'm so sorry to hear that Sabrina is on medical leave.
Yes, we found Sabrina in the middle of the street. So we walked her home and it was a castration. So she has to use that interesting suite now.
So she's doing okay.
Yeah, she's doing okay.
Good. Thank you very much, Paulo. Very interesting talk. And maybe now we can open the floor for some Q&A. Julia and Daniel, if you guys maybe have comments, questions, suggestions, we can start a conversation, a discussion based on Paulo's presentation.
Yeah, well, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, no, I'm a strong believer in ladies.
Pleasure.
Well, I have to do some notes, I have to say, because I was thinking, well, first, there is a huge tradition regarding informality, as you may know better than me. But there is one strain of informality literature linked to, based on India, no, and based on Kaleskian framework. And as Marville knows, I really am an enthusiastic Kaleskian.
So, of course.
Yeah. In the middle of my reading, I was thinking about this huge tradition, and of course, a Kaleskian framework also. So I have three questions and some notes, okay, and I'm going to read them. Well, first of all, it is very, I don't know if it's the first time, but I'm pretty sure that maybe it is. It is the first time that I am start to think about how to link, because it is something that you are living day by day in Latin America, how it works, how the informality works in the cycle, in the economic cycle, in the demand cycle. So So congratulations for that, because I've never think about that. Well, my first question is, how realistic is it to assume that the formal sector adjusts faster in the short run in developing economies, given the constraint like poor infrastructure on general, like input shortage that the model doesn't include? Because I think that maybe the model is a little bit like enthusiastic about how the formal sector is like behaving in developing economies in general. Because if this constraint limits the expansion of formal sector, the model may maybe overstate the stabilizing role of formality, if you know what I mean. Because I'm saying this, I was thinking about this because in Kadeshian literature regarding developing economies, you have a structural problem regarding the infrastructure, the capital stock in general. So maybe the problem is within formal sector, and this is a general question. I was only think about this. Of course, your model. One thing that I really enjoy about your model is that sometimes you are like saying like, I'm not doing this, but I'm doing this, and I'm assuming this, and I know that maybe this is not realistic, but this I'm really appreciate to see this in a theoretical article. But I was thinking about that. My second question is, if the model in, well, you know that I don't know if it's the same in whole Latin America, but here we have this like gray sector with between formal and informal sector, the underemployment sector, this category. Maybe I think I've been seeing this in Europe, for example. It is different. But what is the role about this gray sector? I mean, I put here, if the model includes partially formal of this gray sector with uneven access to finance, how will cyclical relocation and volatility change? Of course, I was thinking about this also because I know that this paper is already accepted, so I needed to think something like new or an extension of the models. And the last one is, this is a good one, because I was thinking about Lavoie model, and then regarding the blue and white collar workers, So my question is, does the model overlook that formal firms often cannot cut employment quickly due to labor contracts and firing costs? If so, how will this affect the stability and the emergence of cycles? If the formal sector is less flexible than is assumed in the model, the economy may be closer to instability, and fluctuations may take a different form. I was thinking, as I said, like you have this variable labor in the market labor that is behaving with the cycle, and you have the blue and white color. How the model will change if you add these three categories, and I think that's it. And again, I think I'm going to cite your article because I have some works related with this. So I think for me, that's it. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. Can I answer now?
Absolutely, go for it. I have some comments, some questions on my own, but go for it.
Okay, otherwise I have problems to remember. Okay,
sure.
The first one, usually, I mean, when we think about that model, I remember because I'm lecturing macroeconomics 2 now. And usually one of the first things you have to say is like, look, we're working with the Marshallian short run and macroeconomic or Keynesian short run. My paper is exactly this. As you can see, we don't have prices, and at the same time, we're working also without changing in the productive capacity. So that ceilings and that limits are given. So that's the why I'm not using the idea that, look, the firm can, for some kind of accelerator mechanism, increase the investment. We don't have any idea of economic growth here. It's a specifically short run kind of model. So that's the why the production limit, it's fixed, and I'm not changing on that. I had the idea of migrate to start with growing, but maybe it can become for the future. For that model, I was really interested in understand the cyclical effect, that the business cycles, and also the volatility So I start to think that, look, if I start to increasing more and more, that thing will never be done. So I decided to stay on that part. Okay. The second one, you asked me about the role of the gray area, right? You said something like, look, but you have companies and some people working in a gray area. Here, I'm more interested in talk about informal output. So, given if the same company is contributing with both, it's like in the gray area, I will contabilize the part that it's formal output and the part that it's informal output. There's a citation in my paper you can check after. I don't remember exactly the name now. But the guys did an interesting paper because they took a giant list of countries and they made interesting estimations about the output, like the informal output. And it's interesting because if you check the informal output of India, it's something like 28%. And you can say, what you're saying, this makes no sense. We're talking about India. But the point there is like, look, the formal output can hire informal labor. It's the case of, for example, you have a big company, but part of your inputs you're buying from someone producing informally, or you can have in the total output can use a lot of informal labor to do that. Because, for example, when you go to the accountings, the biggest product you're selling, for example, enters as formal, but a big part of the production process will not enter. So that's the why you can have a high level of informal labor with 28-30% of informal output. So here I'm thinking more about informal output and not about informality of workers per se. In the paper, if I remember well, I put some note on that. On the third one, you said about the blue and white collar, right? Can you just repeat again, please?
Yeah, I know that in this work you didn't include this, but I don't know if you have ever read about this cycle dynamic regarding the variable. I don't know exactly. I don't remember the name in this moment, but you have a variable element into your labor force and a fixed one, and then this is more like for also I don't know if Amadeo or Lut has something related with this, but I remember the Lavoie work about this. And then within the formal sector, you have this cycle, this exactly cycle. Of course, you are like putting in terms of informality. So my question could be like, if you ever
Okay,
hear
now I
about
got
this,
it.
or yeah.
Okay. Basically here, as I said, I don't have a labor market explicitly in the model. Usually I'm treating everything as output. So it's like a traditional macroeconomist. You can think like, okay, if the economy is going up, you can figure out that the unemployment is going down. That's it. But if I would like to insert that margin, probably in the model would become an extra source of instability. But now I can't say that because I don't know exactly if it has a stronger force on the informality of labor alone, or if it can generate a strong enough dynamic force to really impact the model. So this is something I think I can't say right now, right?
Yeah.
But honestly, at the first sight, I think it's more connected to changing the labor force and not in huge change in output, for example.
I think that could be a next step for you, for sure, because in this moment you are like assuming that you have all these labor first and there is no difference within them, which is perfect. But if you think in the details, you can think like maybe the blue collars are the ones that goes to informality within the cycle, not the other ones. And this has a lot of implications. I know if it's not in your focus. There is a lot of implication in terms of wage and some other things. I know it's not a price thing, but this is maybe a recommendation because it sounds to me like this. I don't know what Marville thinks, but he thinks it was like a very more like Lavoie tradition in these terms. But anyways, congratulations and thank you.
Yes, but you're right. I think a good next step would be start to thinking more about the labor market, because of course, if you're talking about formality, informality, think about the dynamics of the labor market on that sense also between formal and informal could be interesting. This is a natural next step, just for me or to anyone who'd like to continue that paper. So it's an open avenue also for the future. But thank you very much. I really like your idea.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.
Hi, Paulo. Again, this project is very interesting, and I follow this project in a way. And but I have two questions, I think. The first one, I was wondering if your thoughts, these are more like general, your thoughts on the role of monetary policy, or how monetary policy could affect some of your main results. So I'm thinking, I think it's your equation number one. In your equation number one, you have a discount rate. So expectations in the formal sector. So the informal sector has a liquidity constraint, right? So solvency is just equal to liquidity. But in the formal sector, your solvency depends on expectations about future liquidity. And your expectations about future liquidity, you have to bring them to present value. So you have the interest rate there. So I was wondering, I know that it's not the explicit goal of this model right now, but you are able to say something about monetary policy, right? Because you do have the interest rate. So I was wondering, an increase in the interest rate, what implication would that have to some of your main findings? I mean, your thoughts on that. Okay. And I have a second one, but maybe we can start with.
Okay.
We go for
that first question is interesting because the interest rate is a parameter here, okay? And changes in the interest rate are not really effective in that model. Why? Because remember, once again, we're talking about a quantity model. It's a super short-run macroeconomic model. So one of the important channels, like regarding relative prices, are not working here. So this effect is not really big. Maybe no. If I remember well, it will affect the channel regarding solvency and liquidity, that connection, but the effect is not really impactant. That's, for example, changing the other variables. I checked it there. If you check in the Monte Carlo result, I think interest rates are not even there, for example, right? So if you talk more about monetary policy, would be really nice, but we have to start to think, okay, the channels of monetary policy and how that kind of channel can appear inside of the model. So basically, my first impression is that, okay, we have to bring prices to the model. If we just insert some kind of monetary policy rule and we don't have prices, it will be not so interesting at that kind of thing, because we need prices to make the monetary policy rule work properly. And we need the channels to check how that kind of things will affect. It will be interesting because we start to check not only the demand channel but the cost channel if we would like to make something in that direction.
But in that so thank you. And in that case, you might want. I think you're still able to say something about the interest rate, because I have your equation 10 and the interest rate is inside parameter beta.
Yes, it is.
So even without prices, and of course you could say a lot more if you allowed prices to change, but a contractionary monetary policy should affect beta.
Yes, it can affect, but usually it will affect more in levels. The instability in general is like the main thing we'd like to explore in this paper, okay. And the volatility is not
at
least with that design without price. Okay,
that's fantastic. No, okay, that makes sense. And the second question is regarding your M2. Do you mind showing your second map?
Yeah, sure.
Because yes, in the first model, expectations are kind of given, and the composition of the economy between formal and informal are given too. And then in the M2, you allow expectations to change, right? So the composition yes. of the two types of agents that form expectations, they change. And the composition of formal and informal sector also change. And they both depend on excess demand.
Yes.
Why excess demand and not the level of GDP?
No, I decided to use excess demand because it's the same language I use in the paper at all, sure. And could be easier to understand that as a measure of if the economy is going well or not. Basically, I decided to use like a variation because I was using already for the informality variations in liquidity and variations in output, and I keep the same for both, right? And at the same time, I decided to use output as a level here in the numerical exercise. Sorry, as an index. And in that sense, I was interested in check also, for example, changes in production decisions given changes on output. I would like to compare change with change, because when you check there the hyperbolic tangent function, I'm talking about changes in the GDP, right? As you can see here in the equation 3, the y on the right side, the yt is the constant, and what's changing, the delta of that function, is the right side, and this is exactly what will be inside of the composition changes. We can see here, right? So is the delta y.
Yeah. So your x, so excess demand is inside x.
Yes. As you can see, for example, is expectation there, it's inside the y, but I'm taking variations of y. That is basically the right side of the right equation without the yt, just the eta f, eta I, hyperbolic tangent, etc.
The reason why I'm asking these, and it's not for this project, but maybe for a future project, depending on the direction you want to push this agenda, is that I feel you'll have to do the math, but I feel that if you use the level of GDP, because of the properties of the hyperbolic tangent, you might have multiple equilibria. Right now you have one equilibrium, a unique non-trivial equilibrium solution. But if you use levels of GDP, you might have a pitchfork bifurcation. Because inside the hyperbolic tangent, you will have kind of a, I don't know if this is the right language, but kind of a loop y depending on the of y inside the hyperbolic tangent. So that effect, if it's large enough, you will have one equilibrium with high GDP and one equilibrium with lower GDP.
Okay, I understand the point here. Okay.
Think about it, because then you will have
specifically. I'm not sure if we can do something like that.
But it would align with your main result, because one of your main results is that as you increase the size of the formal sector, GDP increases, but you will have higher volatility, right? And this higher volatility might happen with a higher GDP, or with a higher but relatively lower
understand
GDP. You'll have to do the math, and I might be
yes, I understand that. I'm not able to visualize now how it can happen with that specific structure, but I got the point. I got the idea.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you. I think it's a very interesting project again. I mean, I don't know if Danielle or Julia have questions or other comments.
Just a short question.
Sure, Danielle.
Yeah, thanks. I have a short question, maybe kind of related to the first Professor Marvel's question. That is, do you already have in mind any concrete policy instrument that would fit that mechanism that you finished the paper, or if it is it a open question for future investigations?
Look, I still have to do something more concrete, but I can still think about something. For example, when you start to think about credit instruments, for example, for a small business that, if you want or not, are closer to that risk, okay? Of if you go to a downturn, that guy can enter the informal sector and are not able to repay that debt. Maybe you can have an instrument that guarantees that this guy will have access to credit even in downturns. Because usually, I mean, of course, there's no monetary policy here. This mechanism appears in the paper. Also connecting with the question of monetary policy. Maybe could even be the case that the instability could increase, because we could see the fact that, for example, some guys are taking the credit in a good period, when the economy goes to a better period, if this is associated with increased interest rates, that guy will not be able to pay the debt, but the debt will also increase given the rise in the interest rates. So this is something interesting. If I think a bit about real world application, this would be the first thing I would put my eyes on, right? The idea that, look, you have to protect that guys, because the biggest instability force is there. You're inviting more guys to take credit in the good period, but at the same time, you're pushing that guys away and they're not able to fulfill the obligations. And this becomes a big problem. So if you think in a credit policy to protect that kind of company, maybe it should be a thing, right? So it's something that demand, of course, more empirical papers, because here I was more interested in explore the theoretical implications and understand the mechanisms. I'm always really careful to talk about policy implications with that kind of model. If you want or not, we're talking about a kind of toy model. It's a simple model. I'm just trying to explore mechanisms. But if I'd like to say something just as an idea, I would say something like that. But as I said, we need a lot of empirical hard work to say something more concrete.
Any other question, perhaps? Otherwise, I mean, I think this was super, Paulo. Thank you again for accepting an invitation, and I hope we will have the chance to continue collaborating. And the group, the Structural Development Macroeconomics Research Group, you will collaborate with the group and with the members. So thank you, Julia. Thank you, Danielle, for being with us, and see you around. Take care.
Thank you very much. Ciao.
Bye.